everybody has kind of usual signs of aging, and they do vary obviously from person to person. But normal signs of aging are we will start to get a little bit slower, and take a bit longer to process information. I'm certainly feeling that at the moment. And that could mean we can take longer to make decisions. Also, our perception of the world starts to change, and we experience deterioration in eyesight and in our hearing, and our taste buds can change, and things we enjoy can differ from what we used to enjoy when we were younger. And obviously, our bodies start to give up on us a little bit and our knees get a bit creaky. So all of these signs do not necessarily mean a person's living with dementia. Unfortunately, it comes with normal aging that our brains start to shrink a little bit, and this can reduce our attention span and our memory. But there are a few warning signs that we can look out for. So hopefully between Cathy and I, we'll be able to help you out with those today. Okay, so at Crossroads Care Surrey, our primary aim is to support unpaid carers. And we offer a range of different support services, including respite breaks in people's own homes, and signposting, befriending and outreach for carers. But research says that 7 in 10 of people who are unpaid carers care for people over 76 years of age, and 85% of the people for whom they care are over the age of 65. So you can imagine dementia is a condition that we see an awful lot of. Over 5 in 10 of those being cared for are living with dementia, so it's a huge figure. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and the official statistics report says that this accounts for at least 60 to 70% of all dementias. Then we have something called vascular dementia, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Vascular just means relating to blood vessels, and then mixed dementia is the next most common kind. So Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, was discovered by a neurologist called Dr. Alzheimer in 1906. And the brain structure and the chemicals it's able to produce and transmit change in Alzheimer's disease. And this leads to the dying of brain cells. And as the disease progresses, proteins build up in the brain, and this leads to the death of brain cells as well. So we also need important chemicals to transmit information, and that they can be lacking in Alzheimer's as well. So Alzheimer's is a progressive condition and it worsens over time. So as I said, vascular dementia is the second most common kind. And as I said, vascular just means relating to blood vessels. So this is caused by damage to small blood vessels, and sometimes it's caused by something called TIAs, which are like kind of mini strokes. And this causes problems in the flow of blood to the brain. The progression of this varies quite differently normally to Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is normally a progressive disease that worsens gradually over time, whereas this one is more likely to follow what we call a stepped progression, where somebody experiences mild symptoms for a while and then suddenly their symptoms start to worsen. So we suddenly see a deterioration in their abilities to process information and to cope with emotions. Okay, now I'm just going to touch on another couple of kinds of dementia that are less common. As I said, the third most common kind of dementia is something that we call mixed dementia, which just means that it's more than one kind of dementia. Sometimes it can be Alzheimer's and vascular dementia together. But there are also another couple of different kinds of dementia. Dementia with Lewy bodies is quite common in people with Down syndrome, but it isn't just isolated to people with Downs. So again, protein deposits start to form in the brain, and this leads to degeneration of brain tissue. Now, Lewy bodies, we don't really know why they start to form in the brain. And sometimes people with dementia with Lewy bodies can demonstrate similar symptoms to those of Parkinson's disease. And in fact, a lot of people with Parkinson's disease also develop Lewy bodies on the brain. It affects both men and women equally, and it's more noticeable in people over the age of 65. And similar to Alzheimer's disease, this follows a similar sort of gradual progression over a number of years. Another less common form of dementia is called frontotemporal dementia. And that just means that it affects the frontal lobe and the temporal parts of the brain. And it can be caused by a number of different conditions, including Pick's disease, and it can also affect people with motor neuron disease as well. So the frontal lobe and the temporal parts of our brain are responsible for our emotional responses and for our behaviours. And they help us regulate our approach in society and conform to societal norms. So people with this kind of dementia don't normally suffer from some of the memory problems associated with other forms of dementia, but people with whom they live might start to notice changes in their behaviours, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Okay, so the early warning signs, and I will come on to a caveat about these in a minute, is Alzheimer's disease. Quite often people start to have difficulties with speech and finding the right words. Short-term memory seems to go, and they may start doing unusual things like putting keys in the fridge or things like that. Also, it's hard for people with Alzheimer's to understand what time of the day it is, or what time of the year it is, or day of the month. So yeah, they get quite disoriented about whether it's breakfast or dinner time. They might get lost in familiar places and may lack motivation. There could be signs of depression as well. Now, going on to vascular dementia, you'll see that some of the symptoms, early warning signs, are very similar. So depression, again, is shared, and memory problems. But people with vascular dementia, quite often, because they can experience little bleeds on the brain, it can show itself up as seizures or unusual episodes of behaviour. For example, they might start laughing or crying uncharacteristically, and they might get visual disturbances or some loss of sight. My father actually recently had a small bleed behind his eye, and it's damaged the sight in that eye. Now, dementia with Lewy bodies, people experience tend to experience very vivid hallucinations with this, which is one of the reasons we have to be very, very careful with the prescription of antipsychotic medications for dementia with Lewy bodies, and I'll come on to talk about that again in a minute. But people with dementia with Lewy bodies may find that their abilities fluctuate on a daily or hourly basis. And also they may really struggle at night time. They might get very tired and sleepy during the day, but then experience very restless nights. Now, frontotemporal dementia, as I said, the signs and symptoms of this can be quite different. Normally, it's, as I said, those parts of the brain control people's the way they act in societal norms, and this kind of dementia might make them lack insight or the ability to empathize with others where they could before, or they might start showing uncharacteristic, extroverted or inappropriate behavior or loss of inhibitions, which can be quite worrying sometimes for people around them. They may appear aggressive, but this is just because they have an impaired awareness of those socially acceptable norms of behavior. And they might start developing rituals. So, just before I move on to my caveat, I just wanted to mention sundowning. So this is something that affects people with all kinds of dementia. It doesn't affect everybody with dementia, but it sees that people get quite unsettled, I suppose is the right word, certainly towards the end of the day. It doesn't always happen late in the afternoon or in the evening, but that's when lots of people start to experience these feelings of being unsettled or agitated. It is more common in middle to late stages of dementia, but it can happen at any time. And it can interrupt people's sleep patterns as well. So we think one of the things that can help relieve the symptoms of sundowning is ensuring people get as much daylight as possible during the day. But perhaps Cathy might talk about that a bit later. Now, I just want to put in a caveat here. I know I've talked about these early warning signs, but it's really important to recognise that everybody is different. I'm different from Cathy, I'm different from my colleagues, I'm different from family members, and we all have very different personalities. My teenage daughter is moody and will slam doors, whereas my other teenage daughter is very calm. So people are likely to react to dementia in very, very different ways. We also need to remember that many of the symptoms of early dementia are shared with other mental and physical illnesses, for example, UTIs, constipation. So it's really important that other physical illnesses are ruled out. So it's really important to seek the advice of your GP. And as we said before, the different kinds of dementia often have indistinguishable early symptoms. Right, so I'm going to pass over to Cathy, and then I'm going to come back to these.
Fantastic, thank you, Hannah. Just to build on what Hannah was saying, so dementia itself is not a disease. Dementia is a term that describes a range of symptoms, and depending on how those symptoms are grouped, and what's driving those symptoms, the cause behind it, will depend on what type of dementia somebody has. There are over 100 different types of dementia. Hannah talked about the most common ones. I just want to look at what do you need to know for. It's not uncommon that somebody gets a diagnosis of dementia without specifying what type of dementia it is. My advice would always be go back and push. Go back and push to understand, because if you don't know what part of the brain is affected, what that means in relation to how the person experiences day-to-day life and the world around them, how can you best adapt your approach to support that person? So if we look at Alzheimer's, as Hannah said, Alzheimer's in general is a slow, gradual decline. In the earlier stages, it's not uncommon for the person to not be aware that there's anything wrong. And that's where you'll get a situation where a family member will say, there's nothing wrong with me. It's you. You're the one with the problem. I'm perfectly all right. There's nothing wrong with my memory at all. So very difficult for families to cope in that situation when you can see clear changes, but the person themselves won't acknowledge it, especially if you're trying to encourage that person to go to the doctors and have those tests. The tests that are done are a series of elimination. Let's rule out everything else it can be. And then based on multiple different test results, memory tests, blood tests, possibly scans, that would give a very well-educated decision. A uniqueness with Alzheimer's is in that slow gradual decline. So if you imagine a really slow gradual slope down, if the person suddenly changes and becomes much more confused, much more disorientated, much worse than they were yesterday, or much worse than they were in the morning, that's usually a red flag that indicates there's something else going on. That's where I would then be going back to my GP and saying, I think there's something else. The chances are it will be an infection of some sort, urine infection, chest infection, ear infection. It could be the person has toothache and aren't able to express that to you, or they might simply be constipated, but there will be something else going on. If you can identify what the something else is, treat it, the person should then come back onto that slow gradual decline. So always worth remembering, sudden changes with Alzheimer's will indicate there's something else going on. Vascular dementia is quite different, because with a vascular dementia, you get the step decline. You also get a fluctuation where the person may get up in the morning, be a really good, bright, breezy morning person, function perfectly well, go and make you both a cup of coffee, make some toast, sit and have a chat, go to the bathroom, come back. But by the afternoon, you can't find the bathroom, doesn't remember how to make a cup of tea, or you get a cold cup of tea, or you get toast that's buttered on both sides. Things have just suddenly gone wrong. That can be really confusing when you're living with somebody or supporting somebody. I know it, in my time with Alzheimer's Society, when I was working with families, it used to be a constant source of frustration, because it's easy to think they're doing it on purpose. They're just not trying. Tiredness, we all know that if you're tired, you work twice as hard to do the things that, if you're not tired, are much easier. But when someone has vascular dementia, that fluctuation can be confusing. What's happening in the brain when that happens is a bit like if you've ever had a faulty wire on your kettle or on your hairdryer, and you know you need to buy a new one. You just haven't quite got round to it yet. But if you wiggle the cable, you can make it work. There's a special way of wiggling it. With the person with vascular dementia, those electrical impulses that should meet beautifully and pass from one cell to another are interrupted. So the cells are not aligned. You're not getting that passing on of information. And when you think everything we do involves thousands and millions of signals within our brain to make the whole simple thing happen. I have an itch on my leg. It tells my brain, it sends my hand down to scratch my leg. If that message is interrupted, what's the margin for error? Well, I know I've got an itch somewhere, but I can't quite remember where it is. Or I've got that itch, I know where it is, but I can't remember what it is I do about it. An hour or so later, the alignment comes back in, that cord's been wiggled, message goes back through, and I can do it fine. So it's easy to see how the person may be perceived as being difficult, or how frustrating that might be when you're supporting somebody. An important thing about vascular dementia is those steps aren't even. Nobody can say 2 weeks, 1 day and 3 hours, there'll be another decline. You can have multiple episodes in a day, then you might not have one for months. They might be tiny, tiny episodes. So you could be stood talking to somebody, they're having multiple mini episodes and you wouldn't know. But by that afternoon, they're probably much more tired than they would have been because of this, or you'll see slight differences. When we talk about the mini bleeds, mini strokes, it's very different to the kind of stroke that you and I might be more familiar with, where you have one side of the body visibly affected. And you usually, if it's on the right side, the left side of the body goes very weak. They can't walk properly. With rehabilitation, sometimes we can build it back up. These are tiny, tiny bleeds. The transischemic attacks, again, you may be talking to somebody and they will go vague. So they might sway a little bit, might be a little bit dizzy, need to shake themselves out of it, come round quite quickly, and you wouldn't know what's happened. But during that episode, there's been further physical damage to the brain that will impact on either a memory, a skill, or an ability. So very different. With vascular dementia in those earlier stages, the person is more likely to be aware that they're struggling, that something's wrong. Because of that awareness, there's an increased risk of clinical depression. The problem there is that the symptoms of clinical depression are very similar to the symptoms of early stage dementia. So how do you know what's different? The best people to know are those closest to the person. You know their character best, you know their coping strategies best. So it may well be down to you to be going back to the GP and saying, I think there's more going on here, because depression is treatable, dementia's not. So if you can treat even half of those symptoms, you've gone a long way to supporting that person to cope on a daily basis. Moving on to Lewy body. Hannah explained that a lot of the symptoms of Lewy body are very similar to those with Parkinson's disease. The exception will probably be tremors. You're not likely to get the tremors with Lewy body. It is important to say that not everybody with Parkinson's disease will develop Lewy body dementia. That person is at a higher risk because of their Parkinson's, but it's not a definite thing that it will happen. And not everybody with Lewy body dementia has Parkinson's. What you will get is that stiffness in gait, that shuffling in walk, balance, coordination will be off. The important information that Hannah gave you in relation to Lewy body about hallucinations is also worth thinking about. If I had a penny for every time I've been told that somebody with dementia has hallucinations, if it's not Lewy body dementia, I would always question that, because there is a big difference between a true hallucination and a visual perception error, and your approach to those situations would be very different. I'm going to come back to that with the next slide. Mixed dementia we talked about. Most common would be Alzheimer's and vascular, but it can be other ones as well. So that's why it's important to have that diagnosis, to understand the difference between the types of dementia, to know how best to support that person. Frontotemporal dementia, again, Hannah outlined that beautifully to you. I'm going to come back to why that happens, to build on what Hannah said. So in true form, as the government says, next slide, please, Hannah. Thank you. So these slides are not clinically accurate. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a clinician. I'm not even a nurse anymore. This is just really for us to stop and think. Everything you do, from the minute your eyes are open to the minute they close, and probably the time in between, your brain drives everything you do. So just stopping to think about where that physical damage might be and what the potential impact might be on your functional skills. If you start at the back of the brain, I'm just going to run through this quickly. Breathing and blood pressure. You don't consciously manage your blood pressure. You don't tell your heart how often to beat. You have no control over how often your heart beats. You have no control over the fact that you instinctively breathe. So there are parts of our memory that we don't control. It just happens. Digestion, something that everybody experiences. Nobody likes to talk about bodily functions, but it's so important. Anybody that's ever been constipated, anybody that's ever had severe diarrhea, how it makes you feel. You feel sluggish, you feel bloated. The bloatedness in itself makes you feel like you don't want to do anything, makes you feel miserable. It also works in a way that is so clever that you learn from your childhood upwards, from mummy training you with potty training to today. You know what your body needs to do and when you need to do it. So if you're stood at the queue in Tesco's, you've got a pretty good idea. Can I get through the checkout and get home? Do I need to ditch the trolley and run? How long have I got before my body is going to perform? You know that because the sensations from that area are sent to your brain. Your brain identifies that. Yep, got the message, know what you need to do. If you're okay, pay the lady first, take your bags to the car, or no, ditch and run. What if those messages didn't get through? What if only part of those messages got through? And you have this strange sensation, but you can't quite make sense of it. You know something's going on. You know you're supposed to know. The next instinctive thing to do, if you have a strange feeling, you can't see it, so we feel it. What is that? What's going on with my arm? Only this wouldn't be your arm. Couple that with what's happening in the front of the brain, with our social awareness, our socially appropriate behavior, it wouldn't be uncommon if you have damage in both areas that you're likely to then stick your hand down the back of your trousers to see if you can feel what's going on. You're not being rude. You're not being dirty. You're trying to make sense of the little information that's getting through in the best possible way you can. Come up to balance, posture and coordination. People with Lewy body will have damage in this part of their brain. Now, how much of our life involves balance, posture and coordination? Anybody been run over recently crossing the road? No? Because you're using balance, posture and coordination. You're using your hearing skills to listen for traffic coming. You're using your vision to see if traffic's coming. You're multiplying all those skills into one in fractions of a second to get from one side of the road to the other without being run over. You're also pulling those skills that you were taught from a child upwards about safely crossing the road. I was going to mention the Green Cross Code man, but that probably dates me more than I'm comfortable with, so I won't. Coming back to vision, Lewy body and hallucinations. A true hallucination is something that is definitely not there. So I might see a black cat sitting on the back of my chair. There is definitely no cat sitting on my chair because my door's shut and she can't come in. I believe I can see it. I can see it as clearly as you can see my slides. And there is nothing you can say to me that will convince me it's not there, because I can see it and I'm not stupid. So understanding how that might make me feel is really important. Now, a visual perception error is something very different. If I had my coat on the back of my chair, slightly different shade to my chair, maybe slightly different color, and my brain is receiving the message, the back of your chair doesn't usually look like that, so something's obviously on it. Oh, that's a cat. It's again taking those little bits of information and making whatever sense it can. So if it's a cat, and maybe I'm afraid of cats, my behavior is going to reflect that. And I'm certainly going to say to you, get that cat off. Get that cat off the chair. Shouldn't be up there. Get it off the back of there. And you're saying to me, there isn't a cat on the chair, but I can see it. Now, your response to this time is very different. What I need you to do is move the cat off the back of the chair. So move my coat, move the bag, move the blanket, whatever it is that I'm perceiving wrongly, you can address that. If I go to the bathroom and I look in the mirror, and these days I used to look in the mirror and see my mother looking back at me. Now I'm starting to see my nan. So if I come out of the bathroom and tell you that there's my nan's in the bathroom, or there's an old lady in the bathroom, and you go in the bathroom and there's nobody there, and you're going to tell me there's nobody there. But I've seen her. I've seen her through the window. She was there. She was looking at me and she was staring at me, and that frightened me and upset me. So I don't want to go back in there again, because my brain couldn't make sense of what it saw. So it fills the gaps with the only thing it has. Coming back to the front of the brain, that conscious thought, personality. Behind your forehead is where your personality lives. Some key things about personality. One of the things I hear an awful lot, again, about dementia, that personality changes completely. I would argue that because personality is made up of two parts. Part of it is genetic. So you might have your grandma's sense of humor, You might have your Auntie Beryl's skill with numbers. Part of the essence of you is in your genetics. I can't change your genetics, so I can't change that part of your personality. The other part of your personality is made up from life experience, right back to your early childhood, your social boundaries, your inhibitions, what you would and wouldn't do. I love to listen to karaoke, but there's not a cat's chance in hell you'd get me up to sing. I will sit and sing at the table, but it's not within my personality to be the center of attention, get up and do that. And that's all stored, all that information of what I will and what I won't do is stored in the front of my brain. So where does that personality change come from then? I can't change your genetic makeup. I can't change your life experience that makes you who you are today. So what goes wrong? What goes wrong is those inhibitions and social boundaries. Go back to your childhood when mummy first told you, don't pick your nose in public, it's rude. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. You're not going to wear that for an interview. The times my mother would say to me, are you really going out in that? We've all been there. We've all done it. If those social boundaries change, your behavior will change. So I want you to think about, I won't ask you to share, I want you to think about a moment in your life when you've had an inappropriate thought. There was a discussion during a team meeting recently about TikTok. My grandson showed me or introduced me to TikTok, where people put these short videos, and there are a number of very attractive young men on there that are not fully dressed. Now, 20, 30 years ago, I'd have had a very inappropriate thought looking at that. Unfortunately, now I look at it and think, you're about the same age as my grandson, that's not appropriate, because they're my social boundaries. So think of a moment when there's been a thought gone through your head. Maybe you were talking to a neighbor that you don't particularly like. Maybe somebody upset you in a shop. Maybe somebody within your family has said something and you really want to give them a piece of your mind, but you think, no, don't do it. Imagine what would happen if whatever was going through your head fell out your mouth. What would the implications be? So what stops us? What stops us is those social boundaries, those social norms. I've never swore in front of my children. I never swore in front of my parents. Now, I know both my children swear. I know they do. But they wouldn't swear in front of me because that's not our socially acceptable boundary. My children know I swear, but I wouldn't do it in front of them. If I did in front of my daughter, she would be so shocked because of those social boundaries. But if those walls come down or those walls are damaged, then your behavior changes radically. What you would do that would never have been socially acceptable to you before will also change radically. What you say will change, because there's nothing saying that's not acceptable for me. It just happens. If we can then look at the center of the brain. Hannah, if I could ask for the next slide, please. So this is probably the most important part. Remember what I said about that frontal lobe, about those social boundaries and the behaviors. Probably the most important part for Alzheimer's disease, but I think in relation to most dementias as well, is how our memories are managed. Again, this is not a clinically accurate slide. So the part of the brain I'm talking about, if you were to put your thumb across the center of your hand and then wrap your fingers around it, so where your thumb is the part of the brain I'm talking about. This is right in the center, and there are two bits. First of all, the hippocampus. What it's called doesn't matter. What it does matter. Your hippocampus is like your brain's PA. This is the part of the brain that takes every bit of information you experience, decides where it needs to be filed. So we'll send a copy to language, we'll send a copy to hearing, we'll send a copy to the long-term memory, because I think that's useful information. We might need to keep that. We'll discard everything we don't need. It also allows you to recall all the information you need. So everything I'm saying to you right now, your hippocampus is allowing you to hear it, is allowing you to understand the language, is allowing you to relate it to anything you may have heard before, anything you haven't heard before that you think's useful. It's taking it and storing it and discarding what it doesn't want. It's your logic, it's your reasoning. It's everything that says, yeah, I get what she was saying about those social behaviors, but actually I would do this or I would do that. No, in that situation, I wouldn't do that. So your logic, your reasoning, and your order of where your information is stored. Then right at the back, the very end of your hippocampus is a tiny bit called the amygdala. That's the part that says, oh, you know, that's all interesting information, but, you know, how are you feeling about that? Are you okay with that? Has that upset you at all? Has that worried you? Do you need a hug? Do you need looking after there? And the way the brain manages that information, let's think about it like two mirrored bookcases. One of them storing all your practical information from the day you were born up, and one of them has a relative emotion or feeling to every factual piece of information you've got. So Hannah, can we have the next slide, please? Here's where the margin of error comes in. So those two bookcases are identical. Bottom shelf, day you were born. Top shelf is magic. You get a new shelf every day and it grows with you. When somebody has Alzheimer's in particular, the practical bookcase, the logical bookcase with all your facts, with all your reason, starts to wobble. And at first, not a lot of damage. Just takes you a little bit longer to find the book that you need, to pull out those files that you need. But you get there. Alzheimer's progresses a bit further, bookcase wobbles a little bit more. Now those books are starting to come loose. But we can still hold a conversation. We can still, you might say to me, do you remember that holiday that we had when we went to Greece and we stayed in that fantastic hotel? And you'll give me the name of the hotel and I'll remember it. You'll tell me who came on holiday with us. You'll talk about all the things we did. I'll share some of them back with you. I've got it. I've got all of it. Bookcase wobbles a little bit more as the disease progresses. Now one of my books has come loose and dropped a shelf. So now when you say to me, do you remember that holiday we went on to Greece? And I'm thinking, went to Greece. Yeah, we went somewhere. We went somewhere. We stayed in that really lovely hotel. Was it in Greece? So I've lost a little bit of information, but I can still bluff it out. Bookshelf wobbles a little bit more. That book now falls off the shelf completely. So now when you say to me, that holiday we had in Greece and we had that lovely time and the whole family came, the response you're more likely to get is, I've never been to Greece. Why would you say that? I don't know who you went with, but you didn't go with me. I've never been. Because the book isn't on my shelf. It never happened. And I'm not stupid. I would remember if it did. But there's nothing there to tell me. However, if in another scenario, you were sat with me looking through a holiday brochure, and there in this holiday brochure is a picture of very similar to the resort we stayed in. And I can look at that picture. I can't give you facts. I can't give you the details to where it is. But now I'm working off my emotional database because that's the strongest. As my factual database collapses, my emotional database is all I've got to go on. And the feelings I get are warm, they're happy, they're comfortable, they're all positive. So I'm smiling and I know it's good. I know whatever we're talking about is good. If that holiday had been a disaster and we arrived to find that the resort next door is still being built, there were pneumatic drills going all day, we all got food poisoning, spent half the holiday sat in our rooms, doubled over in agony, the food was awful, the swimming pool had bits floating in it that you wouldn't want floating in it, there was a massive family argument, everybody fell out. I might not remember the details, but when I look at that picture, what I get is upset. It's not right. I don't like it. I'm not comfortable with it. That worries me. That upsets me. But I can't explain why, because I'm working off that emotional database. If things collapse from my top shelves down, which it would with Alzheimer's disease, so the most recent memories are the ones I will lose the most. That means my strongest memories are further down. This year was a big one for me. I hit my big 6-0 this year. If I go back to my mid-30s, so halfway up my bookshelf, my life then was very different. I was very sociable. I was married. My children were only little, very little. So I worked part-time. I was still nursing. So my life and everything I did was very, very different. If my strongest memories are of that time, then the time I'm living in now doesn't really make sense to me. So when my grandson comes to visit and I've lost some of those factual bits of information off my bookshelf, I have to make sense of it off my emotional bookshelf. So small boy that feels like family, that feels safe, must be my son. Must be my son, that's who he is. Because I can't place him factually on my database. I can only go by how he feels. You're taking care of me. We're beyond the early stages and moving further down now. You're my wife, my husband, my partner. You look after me. You make sure I'm safe. We go everywhere together. You take me shopping. You help me make a meal. You take me for a walk. I'm always with you. But I can't make sense of who you are on my factual bookshelf. I know how you make me feel. You make me feel safe. You make me feel comfortable. I know I'm all right with you. I know I feel loved with you. Mum does that. It's not that I think you're my mum. It's that you make me feel the way my mum made me feel. I feel safe with you. So I'm not mistaking who you are. I'm giving you the only thing I've got. I ran a workshop way back with Alzheimer's Society for families. It's a face-to-face workshop. And a lady got quite upset when we were talking about the bookcase, and shared with the group that she was looking after mum at home and felt that she'd now come to the end of the road and it was time to start thinking about long-term care for mum. So I asked her what made her come to that point, what had happened. And she said, well, mum doesn't know who I am anymore. She calls lots of people Lynn, even workmen that come to the house. Sometimes she calls them Lynn, and it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. So she doesn't know who I am anymore. Helping Lynn understand that what mum was doing was paying her the biggest compliment she could, because she was seeing people from that emotional bookcase. You make me feel safe. You make me feel comfortable. You must be Lynn. You don't. You're not Lynn. So it didn't matter man or woman. It was how that person made mum feel. She gave them the only label she could find on the emotional bookshelf. Mm-hmm. Please, if the person you care for gets mixed up with names, don't think they don't know you. How important is a label against how you make that person feel? The 3 bookcases you can see on the right-hand side go from those early stages where some books have either fallen off the shelf or are misplaced, right through to the end when you have a complete collapse of the factual database. But your emotional database will stay intact much longer than those facts do. Facts don't matter, feelings do. It's not where am I, it's where do I feel I am. It's not who are you, it's who do you feel like to me.
Oh,
and that's as far as I think we've got for now. So Hannah, back over to you.
Okay, right, let's see if I can go back to sharing my slides. Right, where are we? Where did we get to? There we go. Right. So hopefully you can all see that. Thank you ever so much for that, Cathy. I learned a huge amount from that, actually. I've only seen bits and bobs of Cathy's presentation, so it was great to hear all of that all the way through. So I'm going to start off with tips to help the person for whom you care. And I think Cathy's already started to touch on those. Because it's really important to remember that in their confused state, the person who is suffering with dementia actually thinks that it's real, it's so real to them. So if they repeat a question, I know it can be frustrating if somebody asks the same question over and over again, but the best thing to do is to just repeat the answer, make it short and sweet, and pretend that they've never asked it before. In terms of practical help around the home, it's really helpful if you can keep all items together. So all the cups in one cupboard, all the plates in another, because then they don't have to think about, it can be muddling, I think, can't it, Cathy, if things are scattered around?
It can, absolutely. It's also a good idea to use visual images. So it's not normal for us to stick pictures on our kitchen cupboards, but if you're doing everything you can to support that person, then a visual aid can sometimes be better than a word.
Thank you. So I've said it's always better to make suggestions than ask for decisions. So, for example, if you're making somebody some tea, and instead of saying to them, you know, what do you fancy for tea today, they might not have any kind of thoughts about whether they might prefer a boiled egg or fruitcake, but if you say to them, actually, let's have ham sandwiches today, as Cathy said, they know that ham sandwiches, they like those. That inspires a nice feeling in them, and they're likely to go with that and don't have the anxiety of having to make that decision for themselves. Try your very best not to argue with the person or to correct them, because as we said, absolutely they think that what they're feeling or what they're seeing is absolutely real, and it is real to them. At the end of the day, all our brains are doing is processing information. I can tell you that the chair opposite me is blue. You can't see that chair, but I can tell you it's blue. But that's only because my brain is seeing that chair, seeing the colour and processing that information as blue. You might see that chair and think it's a red chair. In fact, somebody said to me the other day, and it made me think quite philosophically, how do you know your blue is the same as someone else's blue? Anyway, also find an activity you can do together, because that helps promote those feelings of warmth and safety. And as Cathy said, if you can include photos and images in things you do over the course of the day, so you might have a diary of daily activities or might have photos and images around the home, that can help as well. Quite often people in early to mid stages of dementia start to do something called shadowing, where they kind of follow you everywhere you go, just for reassurance. So if you do need to leave the room, the best thing to do is reassure them that you won't be long and develop a reason. So you might not have a reason. You might just want to leave the room for a couple of minutes just to have a breath. But actually, if you say to them, I'm just going to pop into the next room because my watch is in there, it gives them a reason and reassures them that you're going to be coming back. We talked about being time disoriented in early stages and mid stages of dementia. And so it's really helpful if you can get a large, easy to read clock. You can buy them with the time of day, the day of the week and the date. And that might also help somebody in early stages of dementia manage things like their medication and manage meal times as well. And we know that gentle exercise and as much daylight as possible might help. It's quite important not to overstimulate somebody and just think, you know what, if I just run them ragged today, I'll get a decent night's sleep, because they're bound to be tired, because then that can affect the brain in all sorts of different ways. And we know that when we're tired, we act irrationally. We can do things differently to how we would normally do. So it's important not to overstimulate. Right, on to tips to help you. You are as important as the person for whom you care, absolutely. So it's really important for you to try and stay calm, for your own sake as well as for their sake, and try to bring humour into the day. Everything can be made a bit better with a joke. Even in situations in my life where I've been in floods of tears, somebody has cracked a wise joke, and you know, it makes you smile. But look after your own health and well-being. As I said, you are as important as the person for whom you care. And it's really important to put your own oxygen mask on first. If you are under the weather or dehydrated or haven't eaten properly or haven't had enough sleep, you're far less likely to be in a good position and have the resilience to look after somebody else. Absolutely try not to feel guilty if things get on top of you. It's a really, really worrying and difficult time. As Cathy said, you know, how upsetting it must be if somebody who you've loved for many, many years suddenly doesn't recognize you. So try not to feel guilty if things just all start to get a bit much. And how you can help that is try and give yourself some time off where possible. And I'll talk in a minute about how Crossroads might be able to help you with that. Action for Carers and other charities across Surrey actually have brilliant support groups. And if you can get to one of those, some of those are now virtual, which means you don't even need to leave the home. It's good to be with like-minded people, and other people who've supported people with dementia might have faced similar issues, not saying they'll be the same issues, but they might be able to offer some sort of advice. And even if you discard 90% of that advice, 10% might be helpful to you or the person for whom you care. And it's just good to have somebody that you can, you know, talk about your worries to, and share what's going on in your life. Try to relax as much as you possibly can. As I said, it's really important for you to be rested, to have the resilience. And you've already made the first step today. Learning more about dementia and its different forms can really help you and the person. And as Cathy said, help you push for a reason behind the person's unusual behaviour or any worries you might have. You might also be able to get some financial support, or even if you don't qualify for financial support, you might be able to get some help from social services in terms of recognising you have what they call an eligible need. And then even if you don't qualify for any sort of benefits or funding, they can still then help you find the right person who can support you or the right provider. So it's really important for you to understand that regardless of your financial circumstances, you can still have a carer's assessment or an assessment of eligible needs. So where do you go for help? It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? But we would always say the first port of call should always be your GP or the person's GP if they have a different GP. As we said, it's really important that they rule out any other potential causes, or they might be able to treat something that's happening at the same time as dementia. And I think Cathy talked about it earlier. We mustn't let dementia or any other disability overshadow what could be a physical symptom. I worked with somebody with learning disabilities who would constantly be rubbing their face like this. And staff members just assumed it was a behaviour. Well, actually, she had a toothache. So we've got to be really careful to not let, if somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, not to let that overshadow other potential physical things that might be going on. Now, here at Crossroads Care Surrey, we can offer a minimum of 35 hours fully funded provision, and that's regardless of your financial circumstances. Every unpaid carer is eligible for that minimum of 35 hours funded support. And that can come in the form of respite breaks in your own home, or, as I said, other services like we provide outreach services, so can pick up shopping or prescription medication. We can offer befriending calls or befriending face-to-face calls where somebody just drops in for a cup of tea to have a bit of a chat with you. We've also got loads of information on our website. We've got a brilliant service directory where you can look at all sorts of different support services and charities in the area, and you can search for them by location and by category. Another brilliant resource, and I'm sure Cathy will echo this, is Alzheimer's Society. Again, they've got loads of brilliant information on their website, loads of resources available, and they've also got a free dementia support line. And although they're called Alzheimer's Society, Cathy, you'll probably echo this, they are happy to receive calls from anybody who's going through
any type of dementia.
Yeah. So if even if you're in the very early stages and are just a bit worried, they're there to provide support and advice. I mentioned Action for Carers earlier as well. They've got lots of local support hubs right across Surrey. Some meet weekly, others fortnightly, and they can help you just provide companionship and a friendly ear again, but they also have specialists there who can help you in the process for applying for any benefits that you might be entitled to. So that list is by no means exhaustive, and as I said, do go to our website. I will be sharing these slides, I believe, with anybody who wants a copy of them. And Cathy, I don't know if you can do the same.
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to do that. I also understand that the session's been recorded, so if and I believe that Crossroads can send that to you by email if you wanted to share it with anybody else.
Fantastic.
I just want to follow up on something Hannah said about the support available. I do understand how difficult it can be to recognise you need support. Recognising it is one thing, admitting it is something else, asking for it is a whole new ball game. So I'd like you to think about the best torch that you could buy. You spent an awful lot of money for it and you put the best batteries in it. However good it is, however good quality those batteries were, those batteries are going to run out at some point. That doesn't make the torch useless. It just means it needs new batteries or needs recharging. You're no different. If you don't recharge your batteries, if you don't take time out, you can't expect yourself to go on. Be kind to yourself to allow yourself to support the person you care for, please.
Okay, Thank you, Cathy. Right, I think we're going to move on to any questions and hopefully answers. Has anybody got any questions? Or anything you might like to share?
Has everybody switched off mute?
Yes, please feel free to switch your microphones and cameras back on now. Oh, I can see Janet.
Oh, thank you. It was a very good session. Yeah, learnt lots. Thank you.
No problem.
Did anybody come to the session thinking, oh, I do hope they talk about, and we haven't, please do mention it. Can't guarantee we'll have the answer, but we'll certainly try. I know one question that comes up an awful lot when we talk about those early stages and those differences, there are so many other things that can give symptoms that are dementia-like. So how do you know? How do you know when it's something you maybe need to look into further, or if it is just a natural part of aging, or there are other issues? Menopause can give very, very similar symptoms to early stage dementia. So I think the best analogy I can give you is during my younger years, I wasted an awful lot of time walking around car parks looking for my car because I would never remember which floor I'd parked it on. And there might have been an occasion when I reported it missing, only to find I didn't have my car. I'd taken my husband's at the time. That was embarrassing, but it wasn't dementia. So what's the difference? The difference would be where I would have concern to take it further is when I find my car and I've got my keys in my hand and I'm sat in it and I know I should know what to do because I know I've been doing this for years, but I just can't pull that information together. That's a bit different to the ditziness of forgetting which level I parked my car on. There is a difference.
I think a question just popped up from Caroline. Caroline, do you want to ask yourself, or are you happy for me to read it on your behalf? Oh, I can't hear you, Caroline. I don't know what's happened. It says that Caroline has a question regarding hallucinations. Her mother is engaged with her hallucinations. They're very vivid. Does she engage with them?
Great question. That kind of expands out to the truth or lie response that's been controversial around dementia for a long time. I would never suggest that we lie to a person with dementia. You wouldn't like anyone lying to you, so why would we do it? The blatant truth can be a little bit difficult. Your brain's shrinking, live with it. Harsh, not good to go there. Distraction can work, but be aware that we're not ignoring the feelings and the emotions that person's expressing. For example, if I'm saying to you, I want to go home and I want to go home now, and you're telling me, but you are home. This is our home. We've lived here for years. Yeah. I might not necessarily be asking to go to a specific place. I might be saying to you, I don't feel what home should feel like. So I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. There's something missing in me. That's what I need you to address. With mum's hallucinations, you shouldn't deny that she sees them because they are very clear to her. I wouldn't collude with them. Yes, mum, that man with the very big beard and two heads sitting on the sofa is very strange. I wouldn't collude because you don't necessarily know what mum is saying or where it's coming from, how factual it is. What I would do is validate what she's showing or telling you. That must be really interesting, mum. You could say, if mum's frightened, then that's what you need to address. But if mum's just engaging politely, how lovely, what a nice conversation.
Yeah.
Validate what she's giving you. Don't challenge, don't lie, go with the feelings.
Right.
So I can see it's amusing you, Mum. It must be very funny. Go with whatever she's expressing and validate that. Don't challenge, don't deny, and don't collude. Does that help?
Right. Yeah, it's difficult because she hallucinates a lot, and they are very deep hallucinations, for want of a better phrase. I mean, they are very vivid. They're very deep. There are like people in here, and it's not just one person. Like there's a man in here with a child, or there are lots of different hallucinations. But she has like lots of in-depth conversations with them, and it's just very. And I don't know what to say or how to address it. And I have to say, her psychiatrist is really just not very helpful at all. And the psychiatrist says just go with the flow, and it's like, yeah, but and the mum sort of says, Caroline, but they're here, can't you see them? And I was like, well, no, I can't see them, and I don't really know what to say, because I don't want to argue with her, obviously, but and sort of, I can sort of like go with the flow to a certain extent, but I can't kind of, as you say, collude. But I don't. But whatever I say is wrong. But I don't want to make her feel unsafe. But I don't really know how to address it, and it's difficult because she's only had a very recent diagnosis, but she seems to go down the rabbit hole a lot, and I don't know. Do I go down the rabbit hole with her? Do I not go down the rabbit hole with her? Do I? But I don't want to make her feel unsafe. That she feels that this is not. She keeps saying to me, "This is not my home. I need you to take me home. And if you don't take me home, this man who's here with the little girl will take me home." And the thing is, I am her daughter and we live here, but she doesn't recognise me as her daughter. So it's
so that depends on where. Absolutely depends on where on the bookcase she is. Look at what you can address and what you can't. So if she's saying, I want to go home, and if you won't take me, the man and the little girl will, then I would ask questions about the man and the little girl. Now, what's the man's name? What's the little girl's name?
Oh, they're the handyman, because this isn't her home. This is some sort of care centre that she's in. So the handyman and his daughter work here. So
wow,
she's got this whole like fantasy world, for want of a better phrase, that kind of
for her.
that she's built. This is a care centre, and it is this whole kind of like world that she's got, that she kind of inhabits. It's kind of quite weird, really.
Well, weird for you, but for her, it's how she's making.
For her, it's her reality, yeah.
Yeah.
But she has kind of got this whole world.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it is very hard, and this is the difference again between visual perception errors and hallucinations. Visual perception errors we can deal with. Hallucinations are so much harder, because for the person it is real. Work on the validation, work on the positive questioning. So can you not see them? Rather than no, Mum, I can't, I would be saying, I know they're really real to you, Mum. I know that you can see them very clearly, Mum. So validate what she's experiencing rather than challenging it, even in that subtle way of, no, Mum, I'm really sorry, I can't. Because how frightening must it be if I can see something and you're telling me it's not there? That would terrify me. It's more about what not to say than what's the right thing to say, because what's right for today might not work tomorrow. So work on those gentle questions. Try to divert to divert the conversation to let's talk about home. If you've got any pictures of where she used to live, because what she's telling you is factual. She's in an environment where she's being cared for, not where she's in control. So she's giving you those bits of factual information she's got. You can't challenge that. But what you can do is try to tap into the more positives. If you've got photos of different homes that Mum's lived in when you were a child, and try and derail the conversation so you're talking about positive memories. I can't guarantee you it'll work. I can only
Yeah,
guarantee.
the problem is, she's lived in this house since she was married, and this is the house that we grew up in. So this is the only house.
Then it's not the place she's talking about. What she's talking about is a feeling. She's feeling cared for. She's lost control over what she can do in that house. If that's the case, then that's the house that she's ran. She's raised her children there. She's been in complete control, and now all of a sudden she's lost it all. So that it's always worth trying. Do you remember when we used to have we always used to put the Christmas tree in that corner, Mum? Do you think we should put it in this one this year? I remember when I was a little girl, Mum, the curtains used to have this pattern on them. I can remember the sofa that you used to sit on with me and tell me stories. You can only try to divert that conversation, not derail it.
Right, okay.
But if it's a true hallucination, it is really difficult. Just please don't deny. Don't confirm you can see them, because you can't. But don't deny that they're there for her. They are, very much so.
Oh, yeah, no, I know that. So I know I can't not, but it's just like, I'm kind of like...
What do I say? Go with the feelings.
Yeah, right, okay.
I want to go home. I can see it's upsetting you, Mum. I can see this is difficult for you, Mum, and I'm so sorry you're feeling like this.
Right, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, because whatever I say, I just make it worse, and then it's like, panic, and then that's not helpful for anybody. Right, okay, right, yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful, thank you. Yeah, because the psychiatrist is just, because all the psychiatrists are saying to me is, you need to learn to talk to her. It's like, I know that, but help me. I know, and it's just like, oh.
Alzheimer's Society have they have an online forum that you can join anonymously, and what we have found is I'm not a joiner inner, but what I do is I read a lot of what other people say, and I find it a huge comfort when I'm reading somebody else's post that I could have written, and I know it's not just me, or I'm reading how other people, even if it's not how they address the situation and it works, I'm hearing that other people have tried, so I don't feel like such a failure myself, because you're not failing. There are no guarantees with this, and it's just it's not just you that's struggling with it. Then again, some people might come up with things you haven't tried. It's worth having a look, but you're not alone.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, that's really helpful, thank you.
Wonderful. Oh, well, thank you all so much for coming along today. Hope you found it informative. And yeah, let us know if you'd like a copy of the slides. I think Helene said in chat that she would like a copy of them. So we will get that sorted. And as Cathy said, I believe it's been recorded. So it should be available online. So we'll let you know as well. Okay. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful Christmas, and keep your eye open for other webinars that are going to be coming up over the next few weeks and months, and hopefully you'll find those informative as well. And I'd really like to thank Cathy as well for her participation. I think, you know, her knowledge and understanding of dementia is obviously very apparent, and I found her a really great support today. So thank you, Cathy. Okay, wonderful. See you all soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay then, bye.